Voices from below. When I first moved into the house, it seemed perfect. A little rough around the edges, yes, but that only added to its charm. Nestled on a quiet street, the old Victorian had a history I'd been too preoccupied to ask about. I was just happy to be starting fresh after a messy breakup and a string of bad luck. The house was my escape, my new beginning. The first night was a little eerie, I'll admit. The floors creaked and the pipes groaned, but it was an old house, and I'd expected that. I told myself it would feel like home soon enough, that the strange shadows and unfamiliar noises were just part of settling in. But then the dream started. On the third night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, just on the edge of hearing, and at first, I thought I was imagining it. I lay in bed, straining to hear, convinced that it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind outside. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until I could make out words, soft and pleading. "Please, down here, help us." A chill ran down my spine. I forced myself to sit up, heart pounding, and looked around the room. There was no one there, of course, just me and the shadows stretching across the walls. But the whispers continued, growing more frantic, as if they were coming from the floor itself. I stumbled out of bed, switched on the light, and the whispers stopped. Silence filled the room, thick and unsettling. I told myself it was just a dream, a lingering echo from a nightmare I couldn't remember. I lay back down, pulling the blankets tight around me, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Over the next few nights, the whispers returned, each one more intense, more desperate. I'd wake up in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, the voices filling my room, surrounding me, pleading, begging. "Grace, we need you. Please." The voices were soft, like they were coming from far below, muffled by layers of earth and wood. I could almost feel their pain, their desperation, as if they were trapped, unable to break free. One night, I dreamed that I was standing in the middle of my living room, staring down at the floorboards. The voices were all around me, growing louder, blending together into a haunting chorus of pleas. I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear to the floor, listening as the voices called out, crying for help. "Find us, Grace. We're down here. So dark, so cold." I woke up, gasping, my heart racing, the voices still echoing in my ears. The room was silent, but the memory of their words lingered, filling me with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. By the 7th day, the voices were no longer confined to my dreams. I'd hear them during the day, faint and muffled, like a distant echo reverberating through the floors. At first, it was just a word here and there, a whispered "help" or a faint "please." But soon, they became more distinct, more insistent. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just my imagination, but they wouldn't stop. They followed me from room to room, always just beneath my feet, always pleading, always blaming. "Why won't you help us? Why are you ignoring us?" The voices seemed to echo through the walls, filling every corner of the house, leaving me with no escape. I could feel their desperation, their anger, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. One night, as I lay in bed, too terrified to sleep, I heard a new voice, softer than the others, filled with a sorrow that sent chills down my spine. "Grace, they killed us. Please, help us find peace." I couldn't take it anymore. The voices were relentless, filling every waking moment, haunting every dream. I had to know what was going on, had to understand what these voices wanted from me. I started researching the house, digging through old newspaper articles and local archives, trying to find any hint of a tragedy, a reason for the whispers that filled my home. That's when I found it. 30 years ago, the house had belonged to a family of 4, a husband, a wife, and their 2 children. According to the reports, they had vanished without a trace. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. They were just gone. The police had searched the property, questioned neighbors, and combed through every possible lead, but nothing turned up. Eventually, the case went cold, and the house was sold to a new owner. A chill ran down my spine as I read the article. The voices in my home weren't just voices. They were the spirits of that family, trapped beneath the floorboards, calling out for help, waiting for someone to find them. I knew what I had to do, even though the thought filled me with dread. The voices wanted me to find them, to bring them to the surface, to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden beneath my home. So, late one night, armed with a flashlight and a shovel, I made my way to the basement. The air was thick and heavy, filled with a cold that seemed to seep into my bones. I could hear the voices all around me whispering, guiding me, urging me forward. "Here, Grace. Down here, please." I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear to the ground, listening as the voices grew louder, more urgent. With shaking hands, I began to dig, the cold earth giving way beneath my fingers. I dug for what felt like hours, my hands raw and bleeding, the whispers filling my mind, driving me onward. And then, my shovel hit something hard. I froze, heart pounding, as I brushed away the dirt, revealing a small wooden box buried deep beneath the ground. I lifted it out, feeling the weight of it in my hands, and opened it. Inside were fragments of bone, worn and brittle, and a tattered photograph of the family who had lived in my house. Their faces stared up at me, frozen in time, their eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to reach out from the past, begging for peace. I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained what I'd found. They arrived quickly, flooding the house with lights and voices, turning my once quiet home into a crime scene. They dug through the basement, uncovering the remains of the family, buried in shallow graves, hidden away for decades. But as they worked, as they uncovered each broken piece of that family's life, the voices didn't stop. They grew louder, more intense, filling the air with a sense of anger, of betrayal. "Why didn't you come sooner? Why did you leave us here?" Their voices echoed in my mind, each word a dagger of guilt, a reminder of all the nights I had ignored their pleas, all the days I had tried to pretend they weren't there. I could feel their anger, their pain, pressing down on me, filling me with a sorrow that felt like it would never end. The police eventually cleared the house, and the remains were given a proper burial. The voices faded, their cries for help silenced at last. But the memory of them, the haunting echo of their pleas, will stay with me forever. I still live in the house, but it feels different now, quieter, heavier, as if the walls themselves hold the weight of that family's tragic story. I can still feel their presence sometimes, a lingering shadow, a whisper on the edge of hearing, a reminder of the secrets buried deep within the earth.
Drowning in shadows. My name is Ellie, and I haven't slept in days. Every night I'm dragged under in my dreams, drowning in a darkness so deep and cold, I can feel my lungs begging for air. It started out of nowhere, and each night it pulls me deeper and holds on longer. I don't know how much more I can take. I remember the first time it happened. It was just an ordinary night after an exhausting day at work. I slid under my sheets, turned off my bedside lamp, and felt myself drifting. And then, suddenly, I was pulled under. I was underwater, or something that felt like water, but darker, thicker. My hands stretched out, clawing, searching for something solid, something that would bring me back up to the surface. But all I felt was more suffocating liquid. There was no end to it. The terror was instant and all-consuming. I kicked and thrashed, my lungs tightening as the seconds slipped by, my chest aching with the primal need for air. But the darkness only surrounded me, pushing deeper and deeper until I couldn't hold my breath any longer. As I opened my mouth to scream, water filled my lungs. I woke up gasping, clutching my throat, feeling the ache of my lungs as if I'd really drowned. But I was in my room. My safe, warm, dry room. Shaking it off as a bad dream, I tried to calm down. I splashed water on my face, went back to bed, and told myself it was nothing. But that was only the beginning. 2 nights later, it happened again. I was exhausted, and despite the lingering fear from the last nightmare, I had to sleep. But as soon as I closed my eyes, the drowning began. This time it was darker. I could barely see, like murky shadows swirled around me. I could make out vague shapes, thick and serpentine, moving just beyond my reach. I reached for them, desperate for a way out, but the shadows twisted away, disappearing before I could touch them. My vision blurred, and my chest burned. I was sinking, unable to stop the descent, swallowed by the inky darkness. The cold seeped into my bones. Then, just as before, I woke up gasping, my throat raw, coughing uncontrollably. But this time there was something new. I heard a faint dripping sound, something rhythmic, like water hitting the floor. I looked around in confusion until my gaze dropped to the floor. There, on the carpet, was a small puddle, glistening under the dim light from my bedside lamp. It couldn't be. But when I touched it, my fingers came away wet. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to make sense of it. The air felt damp, heavy, like the suffocating darkness in my dream. I told myself it was condensation, or maybe I'd spilled something. I threw a towel over the spot, unwilling to think any further. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The next night, I lay awake, dreading sleep, hoping that if I stayed up long enough, the nightmares wouldn't come. But I was too tired to keep my eyes open. I drifted off, and there it was again. This time, the water was colder. I couldn't see anything. No light, no shapes. Only an endless, thick darkness closing around me. I tried to swim, to kick, but my movements were sluggish, weak, like I was trapped in some kind of invisible web. I opened my mouth to scream, but instead of sound, icy water filled my mouth. It tasted metallic, dark, like rust. I choked, desperate to cough, but there was only more water, more of that thick, smothering nothingness pouring into me, claiming me. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, my mouth filled with that strange metallic taste. I stumbled out of bed, clutching my chest, my hands shaking. The puddle from before had spread, and now my bedpost was soaked. Everything around me felt damp. I touched my pillow, my sheets. They were cold and wet. This was no coincidence. My room was becoming part of the nightmare. The days started blending together. I couldn't tell when the dream began and when I woke up anymore. The darkness was seeping into my life, inch by inch. I'd wake up to find water stains on the walls, my carpet sodden, clothes hanging damp in my closet as if I'd left them out in the rain. I tried to explain it away to my best friend Sarah, but she looked at me with concern, as if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. My skin felt cold and clammy. I could barely catch my breath, and sometimes I swore I could hear the faint sound of waves, like the ocean crashing against some unseen shore. One night, as I lay there staring at the ceiling, praying not to fall asleep, I heard a slow, rhythmic drip from my bathroom. I sat up, heart pounding, listening to the sound. Drip, drip, drip. I forced myself to get up and walked into the bathroom. My feet felt wet as I stepped onto the tiles. I flicked on the light and froze. Water was pooling on the floor, spreading out from the sink and creeping toward me. Panicking, I turned off the faucet, but it wasn't even on. The water was coming from nowhere, bubbling up from the drain as if the house itself was filling up. The smell was metallic, dark, like the taste in my mouth in the dreams. I stumbled back, shaking, and slammed the bathroom door shut, my mind spinning with fear. After 2 weeks of this, I was barely functioning. Every night I went under, dragged into that awful, suffocating darkness. And every day, I woke up soaked, my lungs aching, feeling like I'd been submerged for hours. My bed was permanently damp, my apartment smelled of mildew, and the walls had taken on a clammy texture. One night, as I woke up gasping, I realized with a sickening dread that my hands were dripping. I looked down, watching water trickle down my fingers, pooling on the sheets. My skin was pale, almost blue, and my breaths came in shallow, painful gasps. I had to get out. I couldn't stay in that apartment, couldn't stay in this nightmare. I stumbled to my car, barely able to breathe, and turned on the ignition, desperate to escape. The streetlights blurred through the rain-smeared windshield as I sped through the empty streets. My mind was a whirl of panic, of desperation to outrun whatever was happening to me. But as I drove, the air grew heavier. My vision dimmed. It was like the water was back, pressing down on me, filling my car, turning my breaths into choked, shallow gasps. I tried to blink it away, to shake the fog from my mind, but it was everywhere. Shadows crept up the windshield, pressing closer and closer. The last thing I remember was the flash of headlights, the screech of tires, and then darkness. I was back in the dream. Only this time, it wasn't a dream. This was real. The water closed over me, colder and darker than ever, pulling me under. I thrashed, fought, tried to scream, but it was all useless. I could feel the icy water filling my lungs, the darkness swallowing me whole, dragging me deeper and deeper into its endless void. And then, I saw nothing.
They found Ellie's car submerged in the lake 2 days later. The police ruled it a freak accident, claiming she must have lost control of the vehicle, but no one could explain the waterlogged pages of her journal, describing the nightmares or the soaked clothes left hanging in her apartment, dripping with a strange, briny water. Even more disturbing were the damp footprints that led from her bed to the front door and the strange puddles scattered across the floor. And now, whispers circulate about others experiencing similar terrors, waking up with the taste of metal in their mouths, water pooling on their floors, and an oppressive, suffocating darkness lurking in their dreams. The crawling skin. They started out as dreams, strange, disturbing dreams, but still just dreams, or so I thought. The first night it happened, I'd come home from a long day at work, exhaustion clawing at me. I fell into bed and passed out almost instantly, barely having time to process the events of the day. But then the nightmare hit me, like a shot of pure adrenaline straight to the heart. I was lying there in my dream, but everything felt incredibly real. The sheets around me, the cold air, my own skin prickling as if it was shifting. At first it was a faint itching like the kind you get from dry skin, but then it intensified, turning into something deeper, something crawling. I felt it on my arms, my legs, and especially across my chest. It was like something was burrowing beneath my skin, wriggling and scratching, little legs moving just beneath the surface. In the dream, I reached out, scratching at the spot on my arm where the feeling was strongest. But instead of soothing it, my nails sank into soft, pliant flesh that gave way like clay. I looked down and saw movement, Hundreds of tiny legs like centipedes with sharp, jagged bodies, writhing and scuttling beneath my skin, trapped beneath a transparent layer of tissue. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I scratched harder, frantically, as the insects twisted away from my fingernails, wriggling deeper into my flesh. The skin began to peel back, torn by my scratching, revealing nests of writhing creatures. They squirmed out, sliding up my fingers, down my arm, tiny, sharp legs digging into me, claiming me. I felt them everywhere, inside my veins, slipping through muscle and bone, making my body their home. Then I woke up. My hands were trembling, my sheets were soaked with sweat, and my heart felt like it was about to explode. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was only a nightmare, but my skin still itched, that deep, relentless kind of itch that feels like it's under the skin. The day after that first nightmare, I kept feeling it, the itch. It started as a faint prickling, like the aftermath of a mosquito bite, just under my skin. I scratched, absent-mindedly at first, then more intensely, but it only seemed to get worse. I took antihistamines, slathered on lotion, tried every remedy I could think of, but nothing worked. By the time I lay down to sleep that night, my arms were covered in angry red marks, the skin raw and irritated from my scratching. Exhausted, I closed my eyes, hoping desperately that I wouldn't dream, but I did. I was back in that dream world, but this time it was even worse. My body felt like it was on fire, my flesh crawling with things that shouldn't be there. I could feel them, pressing against my nerves, scuttling around my veins, spreading up my legs and arms. The itching was maddening, but this time, I didn't just scratch. I clawed, tearing at my skin, desperate to get them out. I saw them again, beneath the flesh. Tiny, horrible creatures with segmented bodies and needle-like legs. They seemed to sense my desperation, wriggling deeper as I clawed at my skin, blood mixing with my sweat, but they just kept going, disappearing beneath the layers of muscle and bone. I jolted awake, gasping, my chest heaving. My arms throbbed, my skin felt raw, and when I turned on the light, I saw that the scratches from the night before were even worse. My arms were covered in long, raw welts, as though I'd attacked myself in my sleep. But the worst part? The itching hadn't stopped. It was still there, right beneath my skin, a constant, unyielding itch that felt as if it were spreading. By the third day, I was losing my mind. I hadn't slept in 2 days, too afraid of what I'd see, too exhausted to function properly. The itch had spread to every part of my body, and sometimes, when I looked closely, I thought I could see something shifting under the skin. Little bumps appeared on my arms and legs, tiny ripples that moved when I pressed on them. It was as if something was alive in there. I went to the doctor, desperate for help. They examined my arms, saw the scratches, and prescribed me some anti-itch cream, chalking it up to stress or an allergic reaction. But nothing they gave me helped. I wanted to scream at them, to beg them to look closer, but I could tell they thought I was just some guy going out of his mind. The itch turned to pain that night. I lay in bed, teeth clenched, feeling the sensation of dozens, no, hundreds, of tiny legs scurrying through me. It felt like they were gnawing on my flesh, feasting on me from the inside. I clutched my arms, squeezing them, desperate to stop the movement, but it only seemed to drive them deeper. I stopped going to work, stopped answering my phone. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of my apartment. I had blackout curtains covering the windows, too afraid to see my own reflection, too horrified to show anyone what was happening to me. I'd spent hours in front of the mirror, watching as small bumps appeared beneath my skin, shifting and writhing like worms just beneath the surface. They'd twist and burrow away when I pressed on them, disappearing into my body, leaving behind the worst itch I'd ever known. I clawed at my arms, ripping open new wounds, but I couldn't get them out. It was like they were hiding, waiting, feeding on my flesh. I tried burning them out. I grabbed a lighter, pressed the flame to my arm, but all it did was blister the skin, leaving me with raw burns and, even worse, itching. I tried cutting them out, grabbing a knife from the kitchen and slicing along the lines of the movement. But each time I'd lose my nerve, terrified of what I might find if I went deep enough. By now, I was barely recognizable. My skin was covered in scratches, burns, cuts, all self-inflicted, all in a desperate attempt to rid myself of the horrors lurking beneath my flesh. I was losing weight, my eyes sunken and wild, and the itch was everywhere, consuming every inch of me. It felt like they were burrowing into my skull, slithering through my brain, nesting behind my eyes. And the worst part, I started to hear them. Tiny, skittering sounds like the clicking of insect legs echoing inside my head. They grew louder each day, a constant, maddening rhythm that I couldn't drown out no matter how loud I screamed. I tried ripping at my scalp, tried clawing into my own head, desperate to silence the noise, but nothing worked. They were inside me now, a part of me, feeding, nesting, thriving in the dark hollow of my body.
When they found him, he was huddled in a corner of his apartment, his body ravaged, his skin a patchwork of wounds, blood, and dirt. His nails were broken, fingers stained with blood from the endless scratching. He looked like a shell of a man, his skin stretched tight over bones, riddled with open sores, some bearing visible bite marks, as if he had gnawed at his own flesh. But there were no insects. The doctors and police found nothing, not a single bug, not even a mark to suggest they'd ever been there. Yet the scratching continued. They could hear it, faint and unending, from beneath his skin. A sound of countless legs scuttling, whispering through hollow bones, crawling just beneath the surface. Now, anyone who comes near him swears they can hear it too. That sound of tiny legs scratching, searching. And some say, if they listen closely enough, they can feel the itch creeping in, burrowing under their own skin.
The hollow eyes. It started with a dream. At first, it was like any other bad dream, one I should have forgotten the moment I woke up. But this one lingered, festering like a wound that wouldn't heal. And each night, it came back, bringing those terrible faces with it. In the dream, I'm standing alone in an endless field of mist, a gray nothingness that stretches out as far as I can see. But I'm not alone. I feel them watching me before I see them. I can feel their gaze, heavy and chilling, pressing down on me, even though I can't see them. When they finally come into focus, my heart plummets. They aren't ordinary people. Their bodies are human-shaped, but their faces, God, their faces are wrong. They're blank, smooth, like the plastic mannequins in store windows. No eyes, no mouth, just hollow indentations where features should be. And they're staring at me, all of them, expressionless, empty, and yet somehow filled with intent, like they're waiting for something. The figures surround me, closing in inch by inch. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. I try to run, but my feet feel glued to the ground. I'm trapped, their blank faces hovering closer and closer, until all I can see is that sickening emptiness staring back at me. I always wake up sweating, my heart thundering so hard I can barely breathe. I tell myself it's just a dream, but as the days pass, I can't shake it. Every night, they return, coming closer, pressing in. And it's not just in my dreams anymore. I start seeing them in flashes, out of the corner of my eye, a faceless figure on the subway, staring at me from across the street, lingering in the window's reflection. Each time I turn to look, they're gone, leaving me cold, alone, and haunted by their absence. It's been a week now, and I feel like I'm going insane. I see them everywhere, and it's not just in flashes anymore. They're there, in the corner of my vision, lingering just out of reach. Yesterday, I saw one of them on the bus, sitting across from me. No one else seemed to notice. They went on with their lives, oblivious, as though I was the only one who could see it. Its hollow face stared at me, head tilting in that strange, empty way. I tried to look away, but when I glanced back, it was closer, right beside me. I could feel its cold presence, like ice pressing against my skin, chilling me to the bone. I scrambled off the bus at the next stop, ignoring the looks from the other passengers. my heart hammering so loud I could barely think. But the worst part? No matter where I go, I can't shake the feeling of their eyes, if you can even call them that, watching me. Tonight, I woke up gasping, my room thick with that feeling. I tried to convince myself I was alone, but the air was heavy, suffocating, like something was pressing down on me. I forced myself to look around the room, to prove to myself that it was just my mind playing tricks. But there, in the corner of my room, was one of them, standing still, watching me. Its face was smooth, blank, yet its empty gaze seemed to pierce straight through me. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone, desperate to turn on the flashlight, to chase it away with the light. But when I looked back, it was gone. I stumbled out of bed, my entire body trembling, trying to convince myself I hadn't just seen what I'd seen. But the cold spot lingered, an icy patch in the corner where it had been standing, a reminder that I wasn't alone. I barely slept after that. How could I? My own home had become a prison, a place where they could reach me, where they could watch me without anyone else knowing. I tried to tell my friends, but they just looked at me like I was crazy. No one believed me, not even my closest friends. They said I was just stressed, that maybe I should talk to someone. But how could I explain to them what I was seeing? How could I make them understand that these figures, these things with hollow eyes, were following me? I stopped going out. I stopped calling my friends, stopped responding to texts. I barely left my room, but even that wasn't safe. Each night, I'd feel them getting closer, hovering just beyond the edge of my bed. I could sense them, feel the weight of their empty stares pressing down on me. And then, last night, one of them touched me. I was half asleep, caught in that hazy place between dreaming and waking, when I felt an icy hand on my shoulder. I froze, my breath hitching as I realized I couldn't move. It leaned in, its blank, featureless face inches from mine. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel its cold breath, hear the faint whisper of something incomprehensible. My skin crawled as its hand slid down my arm, pressing into my flesh, and then it was gone, leaving only the cold. Tonight, I feel it. The end. They're all around me now, circling closer and closer. I can see their hollow faces reflected in every surface, in the mirrors, in the windows, in the darkness of my own eyes. They're not just watching me anymore. They're claiming me, taking pieces of me that I can't protect. I can't breathe. I can't scream. I don't even know if I'm awake anymore, or if I'm trapped in some endless, twisted nightmare where they've found me, where they can finally reach me. I stagger to the bathroom, desperate to escape them, even if just for a second. I flick on the light and stare at my reflection, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But what I see staring back at me is wrong. My face is blank. My eyes are gone. All that's left are hollow indents, smooth and empty, just like them. I can't scream. I try, but the sound doesn't come. My mouth stretches open in a silent cry, but there's nothing there. I reach up, feeling the smoothness where my features used to be, the blank, expressionless surface that's taken over my face. And then I realize I've become one of them. When they found the apartment, they couldn't understand it. She was gone. There was no trace of her anywhere, no signs of struggle, no blood, just the quiet, empty room where she'd lived. But in the bathroom mirror, there was something strange, something no one could explain. The reflection showed a figure, faint and fading, like a memory that hadn't fully let go. It had no face, no eyes, just a smooth, blank canvas staring back. The officers reported feeling a chill whenever they looked in the mirror, as if someone, or something, was watching them from the other side. Those who got too close, who stared too long, claimed they could see figures in the corners of their vision, with hollow faces and empty eyes, watching them, coming closer. And sometimes, if they listened closely, they could hear a whisper, faint and chilling, asking one question over and over. Can you see me now?
Teeth in the dark. It started like any other nightmare. At first I thought it was just stress. Nightmares happen, right? My job, my life, it all weighed on me like a ton of bricks. But this nightmare, had a way of getting under my skin. Or maybe it's better to say it was in my teeth, because that's where it all began. I remember the first dream as vividly as if it happened yesterday. In it, I was standing in front of a mirror. Everything felt wrong. I was staring at my reflection, my mouth slightly open. But then I noticed something strange. My teeth. They were loose. It felt surreal as I reached up, tugging at a front tooth just to see if it would move. And it did. It wobbled, weak as if it barely hung on. In the dream, I could feel my pulse start to race, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead as I stared at myself. I tried to hold the tooth in place, but it slipped, sliding from my gums with a sickening ease. I gasped, staring in horror at the gap it left behind. And then, as if they couldn't stand being outdone, the other teeth started to follow. One by one, they loosened, dropping out with soft, wet thuds onto the porcelain sink, my gums bleeding profusely. But that wasn't even the worst part. As the last of my human teeth fell away, I saw something else begin to take their place. Tiny, sharp points started pushing through my gums, jagged and serrated, like a shark's teeth. My mouth filled with them, row after row, pressing forward in gleaming, hungry lines. I could feel them, painfully sharp, crowding and overlapping, stretching my mouth wide. And then, as if that was its cue, the hunger hit me. I woke up gasping, clutching my mouth. My teeth were still there, solid and intact, but my gums ached, throbbing in time with my heartbeat. I forced myself to breathe, shaking my head, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. Just a dream, I told myself. Just a bad, horrible dream. After that, the dreams kept coming. Night after night, I would watch my teeth crumble away, bleeding and falling from my mouth like loose pebbles. Each time, the sharp, predatory replacements would push through the gums, row after row of monstrous teeth that didn't belong to any human. The real terror started on the third morning. I was brushing my teeth, trying to ignore the ache in my gums, when I noticed a slight wobble in my front tooth. A tiny shift. It was the same feeling from the dream, but this time it was real. My hand froze, and I stared at myself in the mirror, the same cold dread sinking in. Slowly, I reached up and gave it a gentle wiggle. It moved. Panic set in, tightening my chest, and I scrambled to call my dentist. But when I got there, he just gave me a strange look. "They look fine to me," he said, his gloved fingers poking around my mouth. "Healthy gums, solid teeth. Maybe you're grinding at night. It's not unusual." But it didn't feel fine. I could feel them loosening, that tiny, almost imperceptible wobble that reminded me of childhood, when I was just waiting for my teeth to fall out. But this time, there was nothing innocent or expected about it. This time, it felt like the beginning of something dark. That night, the dream returned, worse than ever. I woke up on the 7th morning, my mouth tasting of copper. My pillow was smeared with something wet. I sat up, horrified, touching my lips and feeling sticky warmth on my fingers. Blood. My gums felt sore, raw, as if I'd been chewing glass in my sleep. I rushed to the bathroom, heart pounding, and opened my mouth to see blood staining my teeth. 2 were missing from the bottom row, leaving deep, oozing gaps. My breath caught as I saw the thin trickle of blood seeping from my gums, running down my chin. I reached up, and another tooth slipped free, falling from my mouth into the sink with a sickening clink. It didn't stop. They just kept falling, one after another, with each horrid shake of my head or slight touch of my finger. I watched in horror as my reflection changed, the gaps widening, turning my once normal mouth into a bleeding, mangled mess. I scrambled to the mirror, staring as 2 small points began to push through my bottom gums. They didn't look like teeth. They looked like tiny, sharp blades. Pain shot through my gums as the serrated points emerged, forcing themselves out, as if they'd been waiting for this. It was excruciating, and I couldn't stop it. I was helpless to do anything but watch. By the 10th day, I'd stopped trying to leave the house. My teeth, or whatever they'd become, were sharp, jagged things, packed tightly into my mouth. They ached constantly, pressing up against each other, jostling for space, as if they were alive. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep without feeling that ravenous ache pulsing through me. The hunger was the worst part. Every time I looked at my mouth, at the serrated teeth crowding my gums, an insatiable hunger clawed at me, twisting my stomach, gnawing at my mind. I couldn't explain it. It was no ordinary hunger. It was primal, feral, a dark craving that made my skin crawl. It was as if these teeth had their own needs, their own agenda, and I was merely along for the ride. When I looked at myself in the mirror now, I didn't recognize the face staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot, sunken with lack of sleep, my mouth twisted and deformed like some grotesque predator. I kept the lights off most of the time, unable to bear the sight of myself. On the 14th night, I finally accepted it. I was becoming something else. I could feel the transformation completing, feel the creature inside me taking over. My teeth, my jagged, monstrous teeth, pushed against my lips, and I could barely close my mouth without feeling their razor-sharp edges cutting into my skin. The hunger had become all-consuming. Every waking moment was filled with the ache, the desperate need to sink my teeth into something. I could feel it twisting my mind, eroding whatever was left of my sanity. I was no longer Ethan. I was something else. Something hungry, something vicious, something that lived only for the satisfaction of tearing into flesh. And then it happened. On the last night, I stared into the mirror, breathing heavily, feeling the pull of hunger tugging at every fiber of my being. My reflection was barely human now. My mouth was wide, stretched to contain the rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth that jutted out in uneven, overlapping rows, too many to count. My gums were blackened, bleeding at the edges, raw from the endless push of new teeth that never stopped growing. As I leaned closer, something inside me snapped. I felt my mouth open wider than I thought possible, stretching painfully, my jaws clicking and shifting as if they were unhinging. And then I saw it. The creature staring back at me wasn't me anymore. It was a stranger, a predator, a monster with gleaming rows of serrated teeth glistening in the dim light. Its eyes, my eyes, were hollow, empty, filled with nothing but that horrible, endless hunger. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a low, guttural growl, a sound that vibrated deep in my chest, something wild and primal. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just looking at a reflection. I was looking at my future, my fate. I knew I would never be able to go back to my old life, never be able to face anyone again. I was no longer Ethan. I was a creature, a beast that existed only to feed, to consume. As the hunger took over, I smashed the mirror, shattering the last remnant of the man I'd once been. The shards scattered around me, and in each one, I saw the same twisted reflection staring back, grinning with rows of gleaming teeth, sharp and deadly, ready to devour the world.
When they found the apartment days later, they barely recognized it. Blood stained the walls, splattered in patterns that made no sense. Teeth, shards of serrated animal-like teeth, were scattered on the floor, as if they'd fallen out one by one, only to be replaced by something even more monstrous. But there was no trace of Ethan, only the faint, lingering sound of something breathing in the shadows, a low growl, waiting, hungry for something more. And those who dared to look into the cracked mirror swear that if you stare long enough, you'll see him, a creature with hollow eyes and a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth, grinning back, waiting for you to come just a little closer.
Eyes in the walls. It started with the eyes. They haunted my dreams, embedded in the walls, watching me with a gaze that was both piercing and empty, as though they could see into the darkest corners of my mind. Every night I would dream of them, thousands of eyes, lined up in rows, embedded in every surface, surrounding me, studying me. Some were bloodshot, others cold and dead, and some blinked slowly, deliberately, as if trying to communicate. At first, I didn't think much of it. I wrote them off as just nightmares, probably caused by the stress of my job, my recent success, and the subtle hostility of everyone around me. But there was something different about these dreams, a heaviness that lingered long after I'd woken up. And each night, the dreams grew stronger, the eyes more intense, more accusing. By the fifth day, the dreams had taken on a life of their own, bleeding into my waking hours. The eyes were there, everywhere I looked, in my mind's eye, even when I was awake. I could feel them watching, even when I couldn't see them. At first, it was subtle, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, the feeling that I was never truly alone. But as the days passed, that sensation grew sharper, more oppressive. People around me seemed different too. My friends, my coworkers, even strangers on the street. Their glances lingered a little too long, their smiles a little too tight. I'd always been successful, the kind of guy who made his way up the ladder quickly. But I started to sense resentment beneath the surface, like they were all waiting for me to stumble. One evening, after a long day at work, I returned to my apartment and locked the door behind me, exhaling in relief. But as I settled in, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I could feel it, that prickling, that constant awareness that I was being watched. The air in my apartment felt thick, charged, like something unseen was lurking just beyond my vision. Then I glanced at the wall opposite me and felt my stomach twist. There, embedded in the wallpaper, was an eye, small and faint, barely noticeable, but unmistakably there. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me with a silent intensity that made my skin crawl. I took a step back, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, but the eye remained, unwavering, watching. Over the next few days, the eyes started appearing everywhere. In my kitchen, my bathroom, even my bedroom. Some were small and subtle, embedded within the patterns of the wallpaper or hidden in the texture of the ceiling, but others were unmistakably there, unblinking and relentless. They were of all shapes and sizes, some brown, some green, others almost black. Each one seemed unique, as though they belonged to different people. I became consumed by the thought that each eye represented someone I knew, someone watching me with resentment, with envy. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I'd done well in life, climbed the ladder, made money, won praise. But with each achievement, I'd felt the tension in my friendships grow, the looks of my coworkers grow colder. I couldn't shake the feeling that these eyes were a manifestation of that envy, the silent resentment of everyone I'd passed on my way to the top, everyone who wished they were in my place, everyone who wanted what I had. They were all there, in my walls, watching, waiting. I tried to ignore them, tried to act like I couldn't feel them, but the eyes only grew more persistent, multiplying, their gaze growing heavier, more intense. I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel their silent accusation pressing down on me, reminding me of everyone I'd left behind. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft, rhythmic sound, like breathing, slow and deliberate. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, but it was empty. I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself, but the sound grew louder, closer. I forced myself to look around the room again, my pulse racing, and that's when I saw it. The eyes in the walls had grown larger, more defined. They weren't just watching. They were moving, shifting, as if they were embedded in living, breathing flesh. The walls seemed to pulse, to throb with some dark, unnatural life. I watched, paralyzed, as the eyes blinked, each movement perfectly synchronized, as if they were waiting for something. I tried to turn on the light, but the switch wouldn't work. I was trapped in darkness, surrounded by those eyes, feeling their gaze dig into me, tearing into my mind, my soul. I could hear them now, whispers, faint and mocking, like 100 voices murmuring in unison. You don't deserve this. Everything you have should be ours. Why should you have it all? The voices hissed and snarled, growing louder, filling the room with a suffocating sense of malice. I covered my ears, but the whispers only grew more intense, echoing in my mind, searing into my thoughts. I tried to escape, but no matter where I went, the eyes followed. At work, at home, even in public places. I could feel them, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. And it wasn't just the eyes anymore. The people around me, my coworkers, my friends. They all seemed to change, their expressions growing colder, more sinister. I could see the same resentment in their eyes, the same envy, the same twisted desire for what I had. One evening, as I sat in my living room, I heard a soft scratching sound, like nails dragging across a surface. I looked up, my heart pounding, and saw that the walls were moving. The eyes were pushing outward, stretching the wallpaper, pressing through the paint, like they were trying to break free. In a panic, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and slashed at the wall, desperate to cut them out, to rid myself of their relentless gaze. But as the wallpaper tore, something thick and dark oozed out, staining my hands, filling the air with a rancid, metallic smell. The eyes blinked, one by one, each movement slower and more deliberate, as if savoring my fear. I stumbled back, my hands trembling, and watched in horror as the darkness spread, filling the cracks in the walls, spilling onto the floor, surrounding me. I tried to run, but the shadows stretched, winding around me like tendrils, pulling me back, holding me in place. And then I heard their voices again. You took everything from us. You climbed to the top while we suffered. Now it's your turn to pay. Their words seeped into my mind, each one laced with venom, with resentment, with envy that burned hotter than any fire. I could feel their hatred, their desire to tear me down, to see me broken, ruined, just as they felt. I couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. I packed my things, fled to a hotel, hoping to escape their gaze, but it was no use. The eyes followed, appearing in the hotel walls, in the mirrors, in every surface that surrounded me. Each one was more vivid than before, filled with a malice that felt almost alive. My friends stopped returning my calls. My coworkers avoided me. Everywhere I went, people's eyes followed, cold and resentful, filled with silent accusations. I was losing my mind, drowning in a sea of envy, of hatred that I couldn't escape. On the last night, as I lay in the hotel room, surrounded by those endless accusing eyes, the whispers grew louder, filling the room with their insidious hisses. You took what was ours. We want it back. I couldn't breathe. The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides. I stumbled to my feet, desperate to find a way out, but the walls began to close in, pressing closer, closer, until there was no room left to move. The eyes in the walls watched, unblinking, as the darkness swallowed me whole. Their cold, silent gaze the last thing I saw before everything faded to black. When they found the hotel room, it was empty. My things were still there, my suitcase, my clothes, my wallet, but I was gone. The room felt strange, cold, and no one could explain the dark stains that covered the walls, or the faint whispering voices that seemed to linger in the silence. But those who stayed in the room afterward said they could feel it, a prickling sensation at the back of their necks, like countless eyes watching, filled with envy, with resentment, waiting for someone new to take my place.
Chased by shadows. It began with the nightmares. In them, I was always running through a dark forest. The ground beneath me was cold and uneven, twisted roots tangling around my feet as I ran. And behind me, I could feel them. Shadows with glowing eyes, their claws stretched toward me, just waiting to sink into my flesh. I couldn't see their faces, only a terrifying blur of dark shapes twisting and writhing, their sharp breaths echoing through the trees. Every night, the nightmare ended the same way. Just as I was about to escape, something cold and sharp would catch my ankle, pulling me down into darkness. And then, I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, convinced that the shadows were still with me, lurking just outside my window. I chalked it up to stress. It was a hectic time. My family was constantly on my case about money, inheritance issues, the endless drama over who deserved what. But the nightmares kept coming, each one darker and more vivid than the last, until it felt like they were seeping into my waking life. A few days later, I started seeing them outside my dreams. It was subtle at first. A shadow flickering across my bedroom wall, a dark figure standing just beyond the streetlight as I walked home. But every time I looked directly, they'd vanish, leaving nothing but an unsettling chill. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I saw them in the mirror. A faint, shifting form standing behind me, just out of focus. It had the same glowing eyes as the shadows in my dreams, the same claws stretched out toward me. I whipped around, heart pounding, but my bathroom was empty. Just me and my reflection, staring back, pale and wide-eyed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every room I entered felt colder, as if a hidden presence lingered just out of sight. And with each passing night, the shadows came closer. They seemed bolder, no longer content to linger at the edges. They'd move in closer, closer, until I felt like I could almost reach out and touch them. After a week, the shadows were everywhere. They followed me to work, lurking in my office, in the reflections of the windows. I'd see them on the street, darting between buildings, always in my peripheral vision. Their eyes would catch the light, a sickly, predatory gleam that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were after something. That somehow, I'd done something wrong, and they were coming to claim me for it. The nightmares grew worse, more real. In them, I'd stumble through the dark forest, barely able to breathe, my lungs burning as I ran, and I could feel the shadows gaining, their claws just inches from my back. During the day, I found myself growing paranoid. I could feel the shadows pressing in, watching, waiting. I tried telling my family, my brother David and my cousin Lily, but they brushed it off as nerves. "You're overthinking things, Amelia," Lily said, her voice sweet and condescending. "Maybe it's the stress. Just get some rest." But rest was the last thing I could manage, because now, even in the safety of my own home, I could feel them, hovering just outside the windows, their glowing eyes peering through the cracks, clawing at the walls. I was exhausted, worn thin from lack of sleep. Every shadow seemed to taunt me. Every flicker in the dark felt like another warning. I had taken to locking every door, every window, checking and double-checking, convinced that they'd slip through the cracks and drag me back into the darkness. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, I heard a faint scratching sound outside the window. I froze, the sound echoing my worst fears, and slowly, I turned to look. In the faint glow of the streetlight, I saw them, 3 figures, hunched and twisted, their eyes blazing with a sickly green light. Claws scratched against the glass, slow and deliberate, as if they were savoring the moment. My heart seized with terror. I jumped up, backing away, and ran to my room, slamming the door behind me. But as I locked it, the scratching continued, louder and closer. I could feel them on the other side, waiting. And that's when I realized they were inside. Panicked, I ran to the basement, my last hope for an escape. My footsteps echoed against the stone walls as I scrambled down the stairs, my breath shallow and ragged. The basement was cold and damp, and as I reached the bottom step, the air around me seemed to thicken, a suffocating darkness pressing in from every side. And then I saw them, rising from the shadows in the corners of the room, those same figures, twisted and monstrous, their hollow eyes glowing, claws glinting in the dim light. They moved closer, surrounding me, their clawed hands reaching out, their faces blank and unfeeling. Just as they closed in, I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of an old table. My hand brushed something sharp, and I gripped it, a loose, rusty nail. I swung it in the air, screaming, desperate, hoping to ward them off. The figures froze, and in that instant, the nightmare began to unravel. They didn't vanish, didn't disappear in a puff of smoke. Instead, their forms shifted, the shadows peeling away like a veil. And in their place, I saw them, my family, my brother David, my cousin Lily, even my aunt, their faces twisted with guilt and malice, staring at me with hollow, predatory eyes. "You," I choked, my voice barely a whisper, the shock stealing my breath. They didn't respond, only stared, cold and unfeeling. Then Lily spoke, her voice low and venomous. "You should have stayed out of this, Amelia. This was supposed to be easy. You were never supposed to know." The pieces began to click, and a sickening realization washed over me. They'd been planning this all along, watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The shadows, the nightmares, they were a warning, my mind's desperate attempt to protect me from the truth lurking just beneath the surface. They were after my money, my inheritance, and they'd been willing to go to any lengths to get it. "Why?" I demanded, voice trembling. David sneered. "You have more than your share. We just wanted what was ours." I could see it in their eyes, the hatred, the hunger, the willingness to do whatever it took. They started advancing, cornering me in the basement, shadows stretching long and dark behind them, merging with the darkness. I was trapped, my pulse pounding in my ears as they closed in. Just as Lily reached out, her hand sharp and cold as ice, I turned and bolted for the stairs, lunging forward with everything I had left. I could feel them behind me, clawing at my back, their breaths chilling my skin. I made it up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling fingers. My phone was on the table and I snatched it up, dialing 911 with shaking hands. As I spoke to the operator, my family pounded against the door, their voices twisted, calling my name, demanding I open up. But I held the door tight, waiting, heart racing as I heard sirens in the distance. When the police arrived, they pried my family away from the door. David, Lily, and my aunt stared back at me, their faces no longer shadows, but filled with hatred and resentment. As they were taken away, their hollow eyes met mine, promising that they'd be back. The officers looked at me, bewildered, as I tried to explain, but I could barely find the words. How could I explain the shadows, the nightmares, the twisted plot my own family had planned? All I could do was hold onto the doorframe, shaking, watching as they disappeared into the night, the dark secret of their betrayal still clinging to the air like poison. And now, even though they're gone, I can still feel them. Every flicker in the shadows feels like a warning. Every dark corner holds the memory of their glowing eyes and clawed hands reaching out, waiting to pull me back into the darkness. Because some things don't just go away.
The room with no exit. It was just a dream, I told myself, just a twisted, suffocating dream. At first I didn't think much of it. Everyone has nightmares. But these weren't ordinary nightmares. In them I'd find myself trapped in a room, a small, featureless box with no windows, no doors, nothing but 4 pale gray walls pressing in from all sides. The silence was absolute, the air heavy, and no matter how loud I shouted, no one answered. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. In the dream, I'd search for a way out, running my hands along the walls, pressing, pounding, hoping for a hidden exit. But there was nothing. The walls were cold, hard, impenetrable. My voice would echo back to me, weak and desperate, fading into silence. I'd scream until my throat was raw, but nothing ever changed. When I woke, the relief was instant. My bed, my room, the daylight streaming through my window. It all felt so blissfully normal. But each night, the dream would return. The walls would close in, and the panic would consume me all over again. After a week of this, things started to change. Small things at first, things I tried to brush off. One morning I noticed the door to my bedroom was sticking. I pulled at it, feeling a strange resistance, but eventually it gave way. Just old wood, I told myself, even though the wood was new. Then, later that day, the window in the kitchen refused to budge. I tugged at the latch, cursed under my breath, and finally gave up. It wasn't until I walked away that I realized I couldn't remember why I'd wanted to open it in the first place. I felt a creeping unease, but I pushed it down, told myself I was just imagining things. That night, the dream was worse. The walls felt closer than ever, pressing in like they were alive, squeezing the air from my lungs. I woke up gasping, clutching my chest, my heart thudding so hard it hurt. My room felt colder than usual, darker, as if the shadows had thickened, pressing into the corners, watching me. On the 10th day, I woke up and tried to leave my bedroom, but the door wouldn't open. I twisted the knob, pulled, even tried throwing my weight against it, but it wouldn't budge. The air felt heavier, like it was thickening, pressing down on me. After what felt like hours, I finally managed to pry it open, stumbling into the hallway, my pulse racing. But as I looked around, a strange chill settled over me. The hallway looked wrong. Everything was in its usual place, but the walls seemed narrower, the shadows longer. I shook my head, rubbed my eyes, told myself I was just tired. But deep down, I knew something was changing. Over the next few days, things only got worse. My doors, my windows, all of them seemed to resist, as if they were trying to keep me inside. And each night, the dream would return, more vivid than ever. I could feel the walls closing in, hear the faint echo of my own breathing bouncing off the walls like the room was alive, listening. By now, I was barely sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel that room creeping into my mind, swallowing me whole. I tried calling my friends, but the calls wouldn't go through. The line would go dead, replaced by a strange crackling silence that made my skin crawl. Even my phone seemed to be turning against me. One morning, as I walked into the living room, I noticed something strange. The windows, they were completely black, as if someone had painted over them. I couldn't see anything outside, not even a hint of light. My heart pounded as I approached them, pressing my hands against the cold glass. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see a thing. The room felt colder, darker, and I had the sickening feeling that the walls were closer than they'd been before. I started pacing, my footsteps echoing in the silence, the shadows shifting with every step. I felt like I was being watched, like something was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for me to let my guard down. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. I grabbed my coat, headed for the door, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't move. I tried the windows, but they were all sealed shut, the glass cold and unyielding. Panic clawed at my chest as I moved from room to room, every door, every window refusing to open. The air grew thick, heavy, and I could feel the walls pressing in like they were shrinking, closing in on me. I backed into the corner of the living room, my heart racing, my breaths coming in shallow gasps. And then, as I stared around me, I realized where I was. The walls, they were bare, featureless, just like the room in my nightmares. I was in the room with no exit. I don't know how long I stayed there, pacing, screaming, clawing at the walls, hours, maybe days. Time seemed to blur, stretching and twisting, slipping away like sand through my fingers. I tried to force myself awake, convinced that this was just another nightmare, but I couldn't. I was wide awake, and the walls were real, solid, trapping me. Then, out of nowhere, a door appeared. It was small, barely visible in the dim light, but it was there. I rushed to it, my heart pounding, my hands trembling as I turned the knob. The door swung open and I stumbled through, desperate for freedom. But instead of my house, I found myself in another room, almost identical to the first. The same bare walls, the same suffocating silence. I looked around, my pulse racing, and spotted another door at the far end of the room. I ran to it, threw it open, but it only led to another room and another, each one identical, each one pressing in closer. Days must have passed. I lost track of time, lost track of myself. I was starving, thirsty, my body weak, my mind unraveling. The rooms kept multiplying, twisting in endless loops, each one a dead end, each one closing in tighter and tighter. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing with a life of their own, and I could hear whispers now, soft and mocking, echoing from every corner. They knew me, knew every fear, every insecurity, and they were using it against me, feeding off my panic, growing stronger with every passing second. I started to hear voices, familiar voices, like my friends and family calling out to me, but twisted, distorted, filled with malice. They whispered my name, their words dripping with poison, telling me that I'd never escape, that this was where I belonged, and in that moment I understood. The room wasn't just trapping me, it was absorbing me, consuming me. I was becoming a part of it, my mind, my soul, merging with the walls, lost in the endless maze of my own nightmare. When my friends finally came looking for me, they found nothing. The house was empty, untouched, as if no one had lived there for years. They searched every room, every closet, but there was no sign of me, no clue as to where I'd gone. But if you stand in the house, in the dead of night, you can hear it. A faint echo like the sound of someone pounding on the walls, a desperate voice calling out, trapped forever in a room with no exit.
The forgotten friend. It started with a dream, a foggy, half-formed dream that left me unsettled, even as the memory of it faded with the morning light. In it, there was a girl, my age, or maybe a little younger, with wide, dark eyes and a soft voice that sounded familiar yet unfamiliar at the same time. She kept telling me that we were friends, best friends. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't remember her name, her face, or anything about her. In the dream, she would laugh softly, a sound that felt more like a warning than a comfort, and she'd say, "Lucy, how could you forget me? We were inseparable." I would stammer, try to apologize, try to recall anything, but my mind was blank. And that's when her expression would change, her eyes narrowing, a hint of something darker crossing her face. She'd lean in close, so close I could feel her cold breath against my cheek, and whisper, "I never forgot you. But don't worry, you'll remember soon enough." And then I'd wake up, heart pounding, sweat slick on my forehead. I'd lie there, trying to shake off the strange sense of dread that clung to me like cobwebs, telling myself it was just a dream. But as the days passed, the dreams grew more vivid, more real, and soon they started spilling over into my waking life. It was on the 5th day that I saw her outside of my dreams. I was at work, sitting in my small cubicle, sorting through endless files. It was a routine day, no different than any other. But then as I glanced up from my screen, I saw her. She was standing in the hallway just beyond my cubicle, watching me. I froze, my pulse quickening as I took in her features, her wide eyes, her soft smile. She looked exactly like she had in the dream. My mind scrambled, trying to place her. Was she someone I'd met before? An old friend I'd forgotten? But no matter how hard I searched my memories, there was nothing. My stomach twisted as I watched her. feeling the eerie familiarity, the nagging sense that I should know her but couldn't remember. Then, just as suddenly as she'd appeared, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the hallway. I jumped up, craning my neck to see where she'd gone, but the hallway was empty. She'd vanished. I sat back down, trying to calm my racing heart. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the lack of sleep and the lingering dreams were messing with my head. I told myself it was nothing, that I just needed rest. But deep down, a cold chill lingered. The dreams continued, more insistent than ever. Each night the girl would appear, growing more accusatory, more angry. She'd press me, demanding that I remember, that I acknowledge our friendship. But I couldn't. No matter how hard I tried, there was nothing but a blank space in my memory where she claimed she belonged. Then, one evening, I was scrolling through old photos on my phone, mindlessly looking through vacation snapshots, family gatherings, moments with friends. And that's when I saw her. She was in the background of a picture from my last birthday party, standing just behind me, her eyes locked on mine through the screen. My heart hammered as I zoomed in, studying her face. She was smiling, but there was something unnerving in her expression, something possessive, like she was watching me from a distance, waiting. I scrolled further back, and there she was again. In photos from years ago, ones I'd looked through a dozen times before without ever noticing her. She was always in the background, always just far enough to be overlooked, yet close enough to be there. I had no memory of her being there, of her even being a part of my life. But there she was, captured in the photos, as real as any of my other friends. That night, as I lay in bed, the chill of fear settled deep in my bones. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, like something was slipping through the cracks of my memory. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me, lurking just beyond the edges of my vision, waiting for me to remember. I started seeing her everywhere. In the reflection of shop windows as I walked past, in the bathroom mirror as I washed my hands, in the aisles of the grocery store. Every time I saw her, she was closer, her stare more intense, more accusing. It was like she was haunting me, inching closer with every sighting. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of her in the hallway mirror. She was standing just behind me, her hand stretched toward my shoulder, her mouth moving as if she were whispering something. I whipped around, heart hammering, but she was gone. I was unraveling, slipping further and further into a state of dread and paranoia. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep, couldn't escape the feeling that she was always there, watching, waiting. And then she started talking to me. At first, it was just a faint whisper, barely audible, like the sound of wind rustling through leaves. But each night, the whisper grew louder, clearer, filling my head with accusations, with blame. Why did you forget me, Lucy? How could you abandon me? The whispers followed me everywhere, filling my mind with doubt, with guilt, with a strange, gnawing fear that I'd somehow done something terrible, something unforgivable. By the 20th day, her presence had become suffocating. It was like she was a shadow that clung to me, feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every passing day. The dreams turned violent, filled with twisted memories of things I didn't recognize, places I'd never been, moments that felt both real and alien. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt her cold breath on my cheek, her voice a low, venomous hiss in my ear. You took everything from me, Lucy. My life, my happiness. You replaced me. But I won't be forgotten. I tried to scream, to move, but my body was frozen, paralyzed by fear. Her fingers brushed against my cheek, cold and sharp. And then she was gone, leaving me shaking, gasping for air, my heart pounding like a drumbeat of dread. I knew then that she wasn't just some figment of my imagination. She was real, and she wanted something. Something I didn't understand. Something I couldn't remember. But I knew one thing. She wasn't going to stop until she took it. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone filled with messages from friends and family, all asking the same question. Who's the girl in the photos with you? Confused, I scrolled through my social media, my blood turning cold as I saw the pictures. In every single one, there she was, right next to me, smiling with that same twisted expression. Her arm was around my shoulders, her face close to mine, as if we were best friends. But I had no memory of taking those photos, no memory of her even being there. Panic gripped me as I started calling my friends, trying to explain, trying to make them understand. But they all gave the same response. She's been with you for years, Lucy. How could you forget her? It was like the world had rewritten itself, erasing the truth and replacing it with a twisted, distorted version of reality. Everyone I knew believed she was real, that she'd been part of my life forever. But I knew it was a lie. I knew she was an intruder, a ghost, a shadow that had slipped into my life and was now tearing it apart from the inside. And then, one night, she came to me in the dream one last time. I was back in the dark, empty space, the same one from my first dream. She was there, standing in front of me, her face twisted with rage, her eyes filled with hatred. "Why did you forget me, Lucy?" she demanded, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "You took everything from me. You pushed me out. But I'm back now, and I'm going to take it all." I tried to scream, to beg, to plead, but no sound came out. I was frozen, trapped, helpless as she reached out, her fingers cold and sharp as they dug into my skin. "You had your chance," she whispered, her face inches from mine. "But now, you're the one who will be forgotten." I woke up the next morning, my heart racing, my mind filled with a terrible sense of dread. I stumbled out of bed, my hands shaking, and looked around my room. Something felt different, wrong, but I couldn't place it. I reached for my phone, tried to call a friend, but no one answered. I sent messages, desperate for someone to respond, but there was only silence. It was then that I looked in the mirror and felt my stomach drop. My reflection stared back at me, but it was off, faded, like I was becoming a ghost, a shadow of myself. And then I saw her, standing just behind me, her face filled with a triumphant smile, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Goodbye, Lucy," she whispered, her voice soft and mocking. "It's my life now." I tried to scream, to fight, but it was too late. The world faded around me, slipping into darkness as I felt myself being erased, forgotten, replaced. Now, I'm trapped. A ghost, a shadow, watching as she lives my life, as my friends and family embrace her, oblivious to the truth. They don't remember me, don't even know I existed. I'm nothing but a forgotten memory, a faint whisper in the back of their minds. And sometimes, late at night, when she looks in the mirror, I see her watching me, smiling that twisted smile, knowing that I'm trapped, helpless, forgotten, forever. The Sleeping Demon. It started with the feeling of being watched. Every night, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I'd feel it, a heavy, suffocating presence in the room. At first, I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as paranoia or the natural fear of the dark. But the sensation lingered, settling over me like a thick, unyielding fog. It was as if something, or someone, was hiding in the shadows, waiting, watching. The dreams started a few days later. In them, I'd be lying in my bed, just like in real life, but the room would be darker, colder. I'd stare at the ceiling, frozen, unable to move, and that's when I'd feel it, the presence. A figure would emerge from the shadows, tall and thin, with hollow, burning eyes that seemed to pierce straight through me. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It only stared, unblinking, like it was studying me, waiting for something. The longer I looked, the more I felt its hunger, a dark, insatiable need that seeped into my bones, filling me with a sense of dread so intense I could barely breathe. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, the echo of its gaze still burning in my mind. Each night the dreams grew stronger, more vivid, until I could feel the demon's presence even after I woke up. One night, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I felt it again. That heavy, oppressive weight pressing down on me. My heart raced, and I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would go away. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A shadow, darker than the rest, lurking in the corner of my room. I forced myself to stay calm, telling myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light. But as I watched, the shadow shifted, solidifying, taking on a vaguely human shape. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I saw two pinpoints of light. The eyes. They were hollow, burning with a sickly red glow, watching me from across the room. I wanted to scream, to move, to run, but my body refused to cooperate. I lay there, paralyzed, as the figure watched me, unblinking, its gaze piercing, intense. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the shadows, disappearing as if it had never been there. I lay in bed, trembling, unable to shake the feeling that it was still there, lurking just beyond my vision, waiting for me to let my guard down. By the 10th night, I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. The demon haunted my every thought, its gaze burning into me, filling my dreams with darkness and dread. Each night, it would get closer, its shadow stretching across the room, its eyes never leaving mine. I could feel its presence, cold and suffocating, pressing down on me, trapping me in my own bed. And then, one night, it spoke. Its voice was a low, guttural whisper, like the sound of gravel scraping against metal. "I'm waiting," it hissed, its words echoing in my mind, filling me with a terror so intense I thought I might faint. I tried to scream, to move, to do anything to break free from its gaze, but I was paralyzed, trapped in its presence, helpless as it drew closer, inch by inch. Its shadow stretched over me, filling the room with darkness, suffocating me, pressing down until I thought I might disappear into the void. When I woke up, I was covered in scratches. Thin, red lines crisscrossed my arms and chest, as if something had dragged sharp claws across my skin. The wounds stung, the pain a grim reminder that the demon was real, that it was coming for me. The days passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Every night, the demon grew stronger, its presence more intense, more real. It would whisper to me, its voice filling the room, wrapping around me like a dark, twisted lullaby. "You can't escape," it would hiss. "You're mine." I tried everything to get rid of it. I slept with the lights on, kept the TV playing, even considered moving out, but nothing worked. No matter where I went, I could feel it, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for me to fall asleep. And the scratches continued. Each morning, I'd wake up with new marks, deep and painful, as if the demon was claiming me, marking me as its own. My arms, my chest, Even my neck were covered in thin red lines, each one a reminder of the nightmare that had become my life. I could feel myself slipping, my mind unraveling under the weight of its gaze, its whispers, its relentless presence. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own home, in my own mind, with no escape. On the 20th night, I reached my breaking point. I lay in bed, my body exhausted, my mind numb, waiting for the demon to appear, for the whispers to begin. But this time, it was different. The room was deathly silent, the air thick and heavy, filled with an oppressive weight that pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I realized that the demon was already here, that it was waiting, watching, closer than ever. I forced myself to look around the room, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. The demon was standing beside my bed, its hollow, burning eyes fixed on me, its twisted, shadowy form looming over me like a dark cloud. Its face was contorted, a grotesque mask of hatred and hunger, its mouth twisted into a jagged, predatory grin. It reached out, its hand long and skeletal, its fingers tipped with sharp, black claws. I tried to scream, to move, but my body was frozen, paralyzed by fear, by the weight of its gaze. The demon leaned in close, its face inches from mine, its breath cold and rancid, filling my nostrils with the stench of decay. "You're mine now," it whispered, its voice a low, mocking hiss. "You can't escape me." I felt its claws press against my skin, sharp and unyielding, as it traced a line down my cheek, leaving a thin red scratch in its wake. The pain was sharp, searing, a cruel reminder of its power, of its control. And then it climbed onto the bed, its shadow stretching over me, enveloping me in darkness, its weight pressing down on my chest, crushing the air from my lungs. I could feel its hunger, its need to consume, to devour, to drag me down into the darkness with it. I struggled, tried to break free, but it was useless. The demon's grip was unyielding, its gaze unrelenting, its presence suffocating. I could feel myself slipping, my vision blurring, my mind fading as it pulled me down, down, into the void. The next morning, my bed was empty. My friends came looking for me, concerned after days of silence, but I was gone. My room was cold, dark, filled with an eerie silence that seemed to press down on them, filling them with a sense of dread they couldn't explain. They found my bed in disarray, the sheets torn, covered in deep scratches, like claw marks. And on the wall, just above where my head had rested, was a single dark handprint, burned into the paint, a twisted reminder of the nightmare that had claimed me. No one could explain what had happened, but those who entered the room said they could feel something watching them, a heavy, oppressive presence lurking just beyond their vision. And if they stayed long enough, if they listened closely, they could hear it. The faint, mocking whisper of a demon, waiting for its next victim.